The rain hammered against the stained glass windows of St. Michael's Church with an intensity that seemed almost prophetic. I stood at the back of the sanctuary, water dripping from my coat onto the polished marble floor, creating a small puddle that reflected the dim candlelight. Every eye in the congregation had turned to stare at me the moment I walked through those heavy oak doors, and the collective gasp that followed my entrance still hung in the air like incense. "Get out!" someone hissed from the third pew. I recognized the voice immediately. Richard Ashford, my former brother-in-law, his face contorted with rage, and something else I couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps? I didn't move. I couldn't. My feet felt rooted to that cold marble floor as surely as if I'd grown there. My eyes were fixed on the mahogany casket at the front of the church, adorned with white lilies and surrounded by photographs of a life I thought I'd known intimately. Margaret Ashford's life. My wife's life. Ex-wife. I reminded myself bitterly. Ex-wife. Because 3 years ago, she'd walked out on our marriage, filed for divorce, and vanished into a new life with the Ashford family fortune cushioning her every step. The divorce had been brutal, contested, and ultimately devastating. She'd taken everything, our home, our savings, even our dog. All I'd been left with were memories and a restraining order that had expired 6 months ago. I said, "Get out!" Richard was on his feet now, moving toward me with purposeful strides. Several other men in expensive suits rose as well, forming a small, advancing wall of hostility. "You have no right to be here. No right at all." "I have every right," I said quietly, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "I was her husband for 12 years. "You were nothing to her," spat an older woman I recognized as Margaret's mother, Eleanor. Her face was a mask of cosmetics that couldn't quite hide the red-rimmed eyes beneath. "You were a mistake," she rectified. "A chapter she closed. She wanted nothing to do with you." The words stung because I'd feared they were true. Our marriage had disintegrated so completely, so utterly, that by the end, we'd barely been able to look at each other. The love that had once bound us together had curdled into something toxic and unrecognizable. But death, I'd thought, might offer a chance for peace. A chance to say goodbye to the woman I'd loved, even if she'd stopped loving me long before the end. "I just want to pay my respects," I said, taking a step forward. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Absolutely not." This was Gerald Ashford, Margaret's father, the patriarch of the family. His voice carried the weight of old money and older prejudices. "Security!" 2 large men in black suits appeared from a side door. I'd expected this, honestly. The Ashfords had always been dramatic, had always wielded their wealth like a weapon, but I hadn't come this far to be turned away so easily. "Please," I said, and I hated the pleading note that crept into my voice. She was part of my life for so long. Whatever happened between us, I need closure. I need to see her one last time. "You need to leave." Richard had reached me now, his hand gripping my upper arm with surprising strength. "Before we have you arrested for trespassing." The security guards flanked me, and I felt my brief moment of courage evaporating. What was I doing here? These people hated me. Margaret had hated me. The restraining order might have expired, but the sentiments behind it clearly hadn't. Maybe I should just go, I thought. Maybe some goodbyes aren't meant to be said. But as Richard and the guards began to physically steer me toward the door, something happened that would change everything. A sound. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible beneath the rain and the shuffling of feet and the murmur of outraged whispers. A rustling, a gentle creaking of wood, then clearer, a small gasp, feminine, confused, frighteningly familiar. The church fell silent. Every head turned toward the casket. "Did you hear that?" someone whispered. "Impossible," Eleanor breathed. The guards' grips on my arms loosened as they too turned to stare. I pulled free and took several steps down the aisle, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. This couldn't be happening. People didn't just wake up at their own funerals. It was a horror movie trope, a nightmare scenario, not reality. Another sound from the casket. Definitely movement this time. The flowers trembled, and one of the photographs fell over with a soft clatter. "Margaret?" Gerald's voice was barely audible. Then, in a moment that would replay in my mind for the rest of my life, the lid of the casket shifted. Slowly, incrementally, it began to open from the inside. Someone screamed. I think it might have been Eleanor. Several people rushed forward while others stumbled backward, creating chaos in the narrow aisles. I found myself running toward the casket, pushing past frozen mourners, my rational mind completely overridden by instinct and disbelief. The lid opened further, and a pale hand emerged, fingers grasping at the edge of the wood. Then her face, Margaret's face, appeared, and her eyes opened. Those eyes. I'd stared into them countless times over 12 years of marriage. I'd watched them sparkle with laughter, darken with anger, fill with tears, but I'd never seen them like this. Wide, terrified, utterly disoriented. "Where?" she managed, her voice hoarse and weak. "Where am I? What's happening?" The sanctuary erupted into pandemonium. People were shouting for doctors, for ambulances, for explanations. Eleanor had fainted, caught by Richard before she hit the floor. Gerald stood frozen, his face drained of all color, looking like he might be the next one to need a casket. I reached the casket just as Margaret tried to sit up, tangling herself in the white silk lining. Without thinking, I reached in to help her, my hands supporting her shoulders as she struggled to orient herself. "Easy," I said softly. "Don't try to move too fast." Her eyes focused on me, and for a moment I saw a flicker of recognition, then confusion, then something that might have been relief or might have been fear. I couldn't tell which. "Daniel," she whispered, how are you here? How am I here?" I almost laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Margaret, you're in a casket, at your own funeral. How are you here?" Someone had finally had the presence of mind to call for help. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing closer. A doctor from the congregation, Dr. Morrison, Margaret's physician, pushed through the crowd, his professional demeanor barely masking his shock. "Everyone back!" he commanded. "Give her space. Margaret, can you hear me?" "Yes," she said, still clinging to my arm as I helped her sit up fully. "I can hear you. I can hear everything. Why is everyone staring at me? Why?" She looked down at herself, at the elegant black dress she'd been buried in, at the white silk surrounding her. Her face went even paler, if that was possible. Oh God, what happened to me?" Dr. Morrison was checking her pulse, shining a light in her eyes, asking rapid-fire questions about what she remembered. The paramedics arrived, pushing their way through the stunned congregation with a stretcher and equipment. I found myself being gently but firmly moved aside as they took over, their professional efficiency a stark contrast to the chaos around them. Margaret was lifted from the casket and placed on the stretcher. She kept looking around, her eyes wild, clearly unable to process the scene before her. As they prepared to wheel her out, her hand shot out and grabbed mine. "Don't leave," she said, and there was such raw terror in her voice that it cut through years of bitterness and pain. "Please, Daniel, I don't understand what's happening. Don't leave me." I looked at the Ashfords, at Richard's stunned expression, at Gerald's continued paralysis, at Eleanor being revived with smelling salts. None of them moved to comfort her. They all just stared, as if she were a ghost made flesh. "I won't," I promised, squeezing her hand. "I'm right here." The ride to the hospital was surreal. Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally mumbling words I couldn't quite make out. The paramedics worked efficiently, monitoring her vitals, which were weak but stable. I sat in the ambulance beside her, still in my rain-soaked coat, holding her hand because she wouldn't let go. At the hospital, she was rushed into emergency care. I was left in a waiting room, with harsh fluorescent lights and outdated magazines trying to make sense of what had just happened. The Ashfords arrived en masse about 20 minutes later, descending on the nurse's station with demands for information and access. "She asked for me," I said when Richard tried to have me removed from the waiting area. "She asked me to stay." "She doesn't know what she's saying," Richard snapped. "She's clearly confused, traumatized. The last person she needs around is you." But when the doctor finally emerged to give an update, it was my name she'd asked for, not her parents, not her brother, me. Dr. Morrison looked exhausted and deeply troubled as he addressed us. "She's stable," he said. "Physically, she appears to be recovering from what we believe was a cataleptic episode, a form of nervous condition that can mimic death. Her vital signs are strengthening, and her cognitive function seems intact, though she's understandably disoriented." "How is this possible?" Gerald demanded. "You pronounced her dead. You signed a death certificate." "I know," Dr. Morrison said quietly, and I could see the weight of that knowledge in his eyes. "Her pulse was undetectable. She wasn't breathing. She showed no signs of life during any examination. This is unprecedented in my experience. I've ordered a full neurological workup, but right now the important thing is that she's alive." "Can we see her?" Eleanor asked, having recovered enough to join the group. "She's asking for her husband," Dr. Morrison said, and the confusion on his face was evident. She keeps saying she needs to see Daniel. The Ashfords turned to stare at me with expressions ranging from disbelief to outrage. But I didn't care about their opinions anymore. If Margaret wanted me there, I would be there. She was in a private room, propped up on pillows, connected to various monitors that beeped softly in the quiet. Her eyes were closed when I entered, but they opened as soon as she heard my footsteps. "You came," she said, and her relief was palpable. Of course I came. I pulled a chair close to her bedside. "You asked me to stay." She was quiet for a long moment, just looking at me. Then softly she said, "I remember dying." The words sent a chill down my spine. "What do you remember?" I was sick. So sick. The fever, the pain, and then nothing. Darkness. But not empty darkness. I could hear things, feel things, but I couldn't move, couldn't open my eyes, couldn't speak. I tried so hard to tell everyone I was still here, still alive, but nothing worked. A tear slid down her cheek. I heard my mother crying. I heard them planning the funeral. I was screaming on the inside, but no one could hear me. I felt my own eyes burning. "That sounds terrifying." "It was," she whispered. But the worst part was being alone. Everyone I loved thought I was gone, and I couldn't tell them otherwise. I could feel myself slipping away, losing my grip on consciousness. I thought I was going to be buried alive. I gripped her hand tighter. "But you weren't. You came back. Because of you," she said, her eyes meeting mine. "I heard your voice. In the church. You were arguing with Richard, with my parents, and I heard you say you needed closure. That you needed to see me one last time. And something about that, about knowing you were there, gave me the strength to fight my way back, to make my body respond." The implications of what she was saying settled over me like a heavy blanket. If I hadn't come to the funeral, if the Ashfords had successfully kept me away, would she still be in that casket? Would she have been buried alive after all? "I'm sorry," I said, and I was surprised to find that I meant it. "I'm sorry for everything that happened between us, for how our marriage ended, for all the pain and anger." "I'm sorry too," she said. "I blamed you for so much that wasn't your fault. I let my family poison my thoughts, convince me you weren't good enough, that I deserved better. But you came to my funeral, Daniel. After everything I put you through, you came to say goodbye. That says more about your character than anything else ever could." We talked for hours after that. The Ashfords came and went, uncomfortable with the intimacy of our conversation but unable to separate us given Margaret's insistence. She told me about the illness that had struck her down, a rare neurological condition that had come on suddenly and severely. She told me about her life after our divorce, how empty it had felt despite all the material comforts her family's wealth provided. I told her about my life too, about the struggle to rebuild after losing everything, about the bitterness I'd carried and was only now beginning to release. As dawn broke over the city, painting the hospital room in soft gold light, I realized that death, or the brush with it, had given us something we'd never managed to achieve in 12 years of marriage. Honest, open communication. No walls, no defenses, no pride getting in the way. "What happens now?" I asked as the first rays of sunlight touched her face. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'd like you to be part of figuring it out, if you're willing." I thought about all the reasons I should say no, the pain of our divorce, the years of separation, the complications that would inevitably arise, but I also thought about that moment in the church when her eyes had opened, when she'd reached for me instead of her family, about second chances and unexpected grace. "I'm willing," I said. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be medical explanations to pursue, relationships with her family to navigate, and old wounds to heal. But as I sat there holding the hand of a woman who had literally come back from the dead, I couldn't help but think that if she could survive the impossible, maybe we could survive rebuilding something from the ruins of our past. After all, I'd crashed her funeral and stayed when everyone wanted me gone. She'd opened her eyes in a casket and asked for me. If that wasn't a sign that sometimes the universe has other plans, I didn't know what was. The story of how Margaret Ashford came back from the dead would make headlines, of course. Medical journals would study her case. But for me, it would always be the story of a goodbye that became a hello, of an ending that transformed into the most unexpected of new beginnings. And it all started because they tried to throw me out of the funeral, until the dead woman opened her eyes and changed everything.